The British housing market just shifted quietly, almost invisibly right, and most people didn't even notice. Prices haven't crashed, not yet. But under the surface, something is breaking. The kind of breaking that doesn't make headlines until it's too late. For years, we were told property was safe, as solid as bricks and mortar. But what happens when that foundation begins to crack from the inside? When the rules change overnight and the system quietly resets while we're still trying to catch our breath? This isn't just about houses. It's about the dreams that built them. The belief that if you worked hard enough, you could own a small piece of stability in a chaotic world. Now that dream is slipping away, and not with a bang, but with silence. Right now, the UK property market is being reshaped by forces bigger than any single government. Lending rules are shifting, landlords are disappearing, and corporations are quietly buying the homes we thought we could afford. Families are hanging on by a thread, and yet the news barely scratches the surface. This is the story of how the system changed, and how millions of ordinary people are getting caught in the middle of it. Because what's happening in the UK housing market right now could decide whether you'll ever own a home again. It started quietly, with a small change from the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA. Most people missed it. But for those who understand the system, it was like watching a tiny crack appear in a damn wall. The FCA loosened its guidance on affordability checks, meaning lenders could take more flexible approaches when deciding how much people could borrow. On paper, it was meant to improve accessibility and help first-time buyers. But underneath the polished language, the reality was far more complex. By loosening these checks, banks were suddenly able to lend to more people again. More mortgages meant more competition. More competition meant higher offers. And just like that, the very problem the government had been trying to solve, unaffordable housing, started to inflate again. But here's the twist. This wasn't just about helping buyers. It was about keeping the system alive. Mortgage lending is the bloodstream of the UK economy. It fuels everything from construction to consumer spending. When people stop buying houses, the economy slows. When people can't remortgage, they stop spending. So the FCA's change was less about helping individuals and more about protecting the system. Still, for a moment, it worked. People felt a sense of relief. Finally, maybe I can buy. Brokers celebrated, headlines called it a sign of recovery, but beneath that optimism, something else was brewing. Because when everyone can borrow more, sellers see it too. And what do sellers do when buyers suddenly have deeper pockets? They raise prices. The market began to move again, but not in the direction first-time buyers had hoped for. It was as if the rules had shifted and the game had become even harder to win. This small change, one policy tweak, quietly set off a chain reaction. One that would expose just how fragile the UK housing system really is. But that was only the beginning. Because what came next would rewrite the rules for everyone trying to buy or refinance. After years of high interest rates and frozen mortgage approvals, the market suddenly opened up again. On the surface, it looked like hope. Lenders began offering deals that hadn't existed since before the pandemic. Flexible terms, faster approvals, fewer questions. For many homeowners, it was a lifeline. But for others, it felt like déjà vu, a return to the same easy credit mindset that fueled the last crisis. Banks had learned something during the pandemic. People will do almost anything to keep their homes. Miss meals, delay retirement, take on second jobs. So even as costs soared, lending resumed because the system knew people would keep paying no matter what it took. The numbers painted a strange picture. Applications went up, approvals followed. But the average mortgage size also ballooned because people had no choice but to borrow more. That freedom the FCA gave them came with invisible chains. It's easy to call this progress. Easier lending, more approvals. But underneath it, the system was quietly reprogramming itself. A market that once rewarded saving and patience now rewarded speed and risk. The faster you borrowed, the better your chances. For first-time buyers, it felt like hope until they saw the repayments. For those remortgaging, it felt like survival, not freedom. And that's the paradox of this new lending world. It feels like opportunity, but it's really endurance disguised as optimism. Because when everyone's borrowing more to stay afloat, what happens when the tide finally goes out? It looks like freedom. But freedom can be dangerous when the system wants you to borrow more. On paper, the housing market looked healthier than it had in years. More listings appeared online. Price-reduced banners began flashing on estate agent websites. Analysts said, inventory is back, balance is coming. But when you dug beneath the glossy statistics, the reality was stranger. There were more homes for sale, yes, but not because more people wanted to move. It was because more people had to. Behind every new listing was a quiet story of pressure. A family whose fixed-rate mortgage had expired, a landlord whose tax bill had doubled, a homeowner who could no longer stretch their salary far enough to keep up with payments. Supply wasn't rising out of confidence, it was rising out of fear. Meanwhile, demand wasn't really demand at all. Mortgage approvals ticked upward, but genuine buyers were thinning out. Most of those approvals were refinances, not new purchases. The real demand, people who could actually afford to buy, was shrinking. But markets run on perception, not truth. The illusion of balance kept the headlines calm. Sellers saw increased activity and held their prices. Buyers saw stabilisation and hesitated, waiting for a miracle discount that never came. The whole system froze, a dance of hesitation disguised as recovery. The numbers misled everyone. Average asking prices stayed high because the lower-end properties weren't selling at all. They were being withdrawn quietly unsold. The only sales happening were in the upper tiers, the ones wealthy cash buyers could still grab. So when analysts said prices haven't fallen much, they were right, but for the wrong reason. The real market, the one where normal people live, had already cracked, and yet the illusion persisted. Politicians pointed to those same figures as proof of resilience. Banks cited them to justify more lending. News anchors repeated them to fill airtime. It's a strange thing. When a system depends on confidence, everyone has an incentive to lie, just a little. Sellers lie to themselves, believing they'll get last year's price. Buyers lie, pretending they're just waiting for the right time. Governments lie, saying stability is just around the corner. But the truth is simpler and darker. There's no balance, just a slow erosion of trust disguised as normalcy. For years, demand and supply moved together like a heartbeat. But now one's rising because of necessity and the other's falling because of exhaustion. They're moving in opposite directions and the pulse is fading. The housing market has become a mirror of the country itself, full of movement, but no real progress. And the scariest part, everyone sees it, but no one wants to say it aloud because admitting the illusion is over means admitting what comes next. And what came next would hit even harder. A silent wave that pushed thousands of families toward the edge of losing everything. It began as a quiet countdown, 3 years, 2, 1, and suddenly the clock hit 0. Hundreds of thousands of homeowners who had locked into low fixed-rate mortgages during the pandemic began to see their deals expire. Overnight, their payments didn't just increase, they exploded for many. What used to be £900 a month turned into £1,600 or more. That wasn't an adjustment, that was a collapse in disposable income. Families who had stretched every penny to get on the ladder were now being crushed by the very debt that was supposed to secure their future. For years they'd been told buying is always better than renting. But now, for the first time, some renters were paying less than homeowners. The mortgage cliff, as economists called it, wasn't just about numbers. It was psychological. People who once felt secure were now trapped, watching the walls of their dream home close in on them. Some tried to sell before the pain got worse. Others held on, hoping for rate cuts that never seemed to come. The saddest part? Most of these people didn't make mistakes. They followed every rule. They saved, they bought, they budgeted, and yet the system punished them for doing exactly what it told them to do. Estate agents began whispering the phrase forced seller. It wasn't a crash yet, but it was a storm forming. Each home that went up for sale added to the illusion of rising supply. But behind those numbers were human stories. Marriages under strain, savings drained, mental health collapsing. When people talk about market corrections, they use cold words, graphs, forecasts, percentages. But this wasn't a correction. It was people losing sleep at 2 a.m. out, staring at spreadsheets, wondering if they could survive one more payment cycle. The mortgage cliff wasn't dramatic at first. It didn't look like 2008. There were no queues outside banks, no mass repossessions. It was slower, quieter. A drip of pressure that grew month after month. And yet beneath that quiet was panic. Because if people couldn't hold on, if they started selling in masses, the next domino would fall. And that domino was the landlords. For decades, landlords were the backbone of the British property market. They bought, they rented, they built wealth through real estate, and in return they supplied homes for millions of tenants. But now that system is cracking too. It started with small landlords, the so-called accidental owners who had one or two properties. Rising mortgage rates turned their once profitable rentals into money pits. The numbers stopped working. Before they could charge £1,200 in rent on a £700 mortgage and still come out ahead. Now the same property cost £1,400 to finance, and that's before taxes, repairs and maintenance. The math no longer made sense. One by one, landlords began selling off their portfolios. Some quietly exited, others were forced out. The government had promised reforms, but instead it added new regulations, tougher taxes and stricter eviction laws. What was once a safe investment had become a bureaucratic nightmare. And every time a landlord sold, something subtle shifted. That property didn't go to a first-time buyer. It often went to a cash-rich investor, sometimes foreign, sometimes corporate. The middle layer, small-scale owners, was being squeezed out. The dream of a nation of landlords was dying. To the average renter, this might sound like justice. After all, landlords had profited for years. But in reality, it only deepened the crisis. When small landlords leave, the number of rental homes drops. And when supply falls, rents rise fast. So renters didn't win, they lost too. By 2025, some UK cities had seen rents jump by over 12% in a single year. That's not inflation, that's desperation. And while the small players were leaving, the big ones were circling. Because in every crisis, someone always finds an opportunity. And when individuals retreat, institutions move in. That's exactly what happened. Private equity firms and corporate investors began buying entire housing developments, hundreds of units at a time. They weren't looking to sell, they were looking to rent permanently. It's a business model called build to rent, and it's transforming the housing landscape. These companies have deep pockets, cheap financing and no emotional attachment. They don't panic when rates rise. They don't need to sell, they just buy, hold and wait. At first glance, it looks efficient. Sleek buildings, modern amenities, predictable rent structures. But beneath that polished surface lies a darker reality: concentration of ownership. When your landlord is a company, not a person, you lose leverage. You can't negotiate with an algorithm. You can't appeal to empathy. And these corporations aren't playing the same game. They see housing as data. When their system predicts rent can rise 7%, it does. Automatically. When a tenant complains, they're just another ticket in a support queue. The power dynamic has shifted from local to corporate, from personal to statistical. And it's not just happening in London. Cities like Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, all are seeing large-scale acquisitions by real estate funds and pension trusts. The irony is cruel. While politicians talk about helping first-time buyers, entire developments are being sold in bulk before they even hit the open market. In other words, homes that could have gone to families are being turned into assets. This is the quiet corporatisation of shelter. The final evolution of a system where homes are no longer homes, but financial instruments. When small landlords leave, the balance breaks. When corporations take over, that break becomes permanent. And just when people thought things couldn't get worse, a new storm was already forming on the horizon. While the market wrestled with affordability and ownership shifted toward corporations, another threat began brewing. One that didn't come from banks or builders, but from policy. The idea was simple on paper. Introduce a land value tax, a way to make property taxation fairer and discourage speculation. But in practice, it could become one of the most divisive financial policies in modern British history. Proponents said it would target the wealthy, the large developers, the speculators who hoard land without building. It sounded noble. A tax that makes billionaires finally pay their share. But as always, the fine print told another story. The tax wouldn't just hit oligarchs and corporations, it would apply to everyone. Homeowners, retirees, small landlords, even those with modest properties inherited generations ago. For the rich, it was a nuisance. For the middle class, it was existential. Imagine paying thousands more a year simply because your postcode became desirable. Imagine being taxed not on what you earn, but on the potential value of the ground beneath your feet. That's what a land value tax does. A milestone, it doesn't care about income, it cares about location. And while politicians framed it as economic justice, critics saw it for what it was, a way to raise revenue without saying the word income tax. The danger? It could trigger another wave of forced selling, especially among pensioners and long-term homeowners on fixed incomes. So while the government spoke of modernising housing policy, many quietly wondered, is this a tax reform or a wealth transfer? Because in the end, the people who will bear the weight won't be the billionaires. It'll be the teachers, the nurses, the families who thought owning a home meant stability. The housing system, once built on aspiration, was turning into a maze, one where every exit came with a price tag. And as this new tax storm gathered momentum, it revealed the truth that few wanted to admit. This wasn't a crisis anymore, it was a transformation. So what does it all mean? For decades, the British housing market wasn't just an economic system, it was an identity. Owning a home meant success, security, belonging. It was the heart of the social contract. Work hard, save up, and one day you'll have a place to call your own. But that contract has been rewritten, quietly, systematically. First, lending changed. Then affordability eroded, then ownership shifted from individuals to corporations. Now even the act of holding onto property comes with a cost few can afford. We're not witnessing a collapse, we're witnessing a transition from personal ownership to institutional control, from homes as family legacies to homes as data-driven assets. And yet within that change lies a choice. Because the housing market isn't just numbers, it's people. It's the young couple still saving for their first deposit, the single parent fighting to keep their rented flat, the retiree watching the neighbourhood they built disappear around them. The system may be changing, but awareness is power. When you understand what's happening, who benefits, who pays, who profits, you stop being a bystander. You start becoming part of the solution. Housing in the UK isn't dying, it's evolving. The question is whether that evolution will serve people or profit. And as the walls close in, one truth remains. The fight for affordable homes isn't just about property. It's about dignity, stability, the right to exist in the place you call home. So as the next headline flashes across your screen about prices, policies or projections, remember, behind every statistic is a story. And right now, that story is all of us.